Welcome to the CivilNet podcast. I'm your host, Paul Vartan-Sukiasyan, and we are just about 1 year out from a very important date in modern Armenian history, that is the 2026 elections. Now, to help us understand what's exactly going on here and what's at stake, we have our political commentator, Eric Hacopian here.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So can you survey the field a bit for us? You know, who are the competition? We know Nikol Pashinyan, of course, but who else is there?
Well, I think the better question is who is not there. Right now, the political field is the current government, the Prime Minister, and the old government and the old opposition, which is the actual official opposition in the parliament. It's clear from Sarkisyan's statements that he's going to run as a candidate, which is a gift to the current government. Really, the big issue here is there will be third parties running, and there's not speculation that they will come out. It's a question of how much do they catch fire. And this is the venerable third force that everyone's been talking about, parties that are not tied to the current government or the old regime. I think there will be those parties. The issue is who they are and how successful they will be, or how much they catch on. I suspect those parties will be coming out of people from the business sector or the IT sector. I'm guessing that's where the money is, and people who have resources and time to do it. So I think the issue is, will that force develop? And if that force develops, does it become a real threat to this government? Is because if that force actually takes off, it's hard to beat this government because it has a base and institutional support and obviously institutional advantages. However, they can actually quite easily best the opposition because they will be more popular than the opposition without the baggage. So the issue over the next year to watch out for is the development of this third force, how it happens, if the efforts are successful, and who is part of it.
Yeah, for example, I know there's also some pro-European parties which, like, for example, they were behind this signature campaign. Are they kind of, they're not with Pashinyan's party, but are they sympathetic to it, or are they more likely to perhaps attack him from their own, pro-EU side, which, of course, Pashinyan kind of is in charge of the...
I think they are actual political proxies or allies of this current government. There's always been speculation, and we saw it in the last election, people like Eric Hacopian running. The problem is if you're running for parliament and you have the same agenda as the current government, and you're not willing to criticize him on anything, why would the average voter vote for you when you have the real thing? If you want to vote for Nikol Pashinyan, you'll vote for Nikol Pashinyan and not his imitation. So I've never been enamored by their capacity to build anything. Because it's farcical on a level, so it's not really practical, and from a political science perspective, it really can't work because voters will always go for the real version rather than the alternative version, which serves no purpose.
Now, another big issue of this election is, will there be a constitutional referendum on the ballot? They've said before maybe 2027, but now it's looking more like they're pushing it to combine it in with this. Mm-hmm. So what do you think that's going to happen? The
Aliyev referendum is likely to be on the ballot. They have pretty much said so. Now they could change their mind half a dozen different times. But as of currently constituted, I expect that, or according to what they say, it will be on the ballot at the same time. And it will be removing the language that Ilham Aliyev wants it removed. So we should call it for what it is, which is the Ilham Aliyev referendum. It's nothing else. Whatever else is put in it is sweetener to try to make it possible for this government, the voters, to be willing to personally humiliate the country further to meet the demands of a foreign dictator. This is the referendum, frankly, it's a dangerous gamble for this government because it could actually be an organizing tool to unite the entirety of the opposition against them. In polling right now, it's doing quite poorly because people know who the author of this referendum is. So if they're the only ones out there pushing for this very unpopular thing, you could actually have a situation where you unite an entire opposition of people who hate each other. And people who don't think that's a possibility, you have to be careful what you wish for, is because it's not the same thing. The Gyumri municipal elections are very specific, and Gyumri is a very specific place. But you saw to the extent that the entirety of the opposition of people who hated each other were willing to unite to get rid of civil contract. The setup on a national level is different as far as the election laws goes, but if this government continues to alienate the entirety of the body politic on issues like this, on this unpopular referendum, they could create a unity among their opponents that frankly doesn't exist and is not even natural.
Sounds like a really difficult, tall order for the Pashinyan government if they are going to combine this together. Is this because of, I mean, they could easily, we would think, push it out a year because it takes a long time to write a constitution. What is the urgency? Is this coming, again, from Baku?
Fear. I mean, they're trying to comply with the demands of the dictator in Baku. There's no other, I mean, listen, there's ways to try to sugarcoat it, but there really isn't. Why out of nowhere? Why this? You're saying that reference to Artsakh should be taken out. So it's obviously to meet demands or they're being intimidated. And even if they do this, and I think that there's a very specific play here because Aliyev knows that this probably will not pass. So it's a trap. And then after it does not pass, he will say, well, the Armenian nation wants war. This government doesn't want war, but the Armenian nation wants war. I mean, to the extent that now they're saying we want to make a peace deal with the Armenian nation and not with this government. So it's a perfect trap if voters would naturally or instinctively will be against this. Secondly, this government would need to scare people, essentially scaring them, saying that you're voting for war if you don't vote for it. But that's self-humiliating for them because, well, what have you been doing for 5 years to strengthen the country so we don't have to deal with this? And lastly, and if you understand it from a totalitarian perspective, what Ilham Aliyev wants this government to do is to actually cheat in the elections for this thing to pass. Because if they're forced to stuff ballots, which I don't think that's their basic instinct, but if they're forced to do that, then you're bringing Armenia down to their own level of the one big advantage that Armenia has is democracy. That democracy, you can use it. That trump card will be taken away out of the Armenian set of cards.
Well, when it comes to selling this to the people, then besides fear, are there any other tactics?
Well, they can put in popular things in it. Like something that is a proportional representation in future elections. So it's not majority winner take all, where you will, from this point on, we will always have coalition governments because no party is likely to get 50% plus. There are things in there that you can do to sweeten this pie. However, given the external actions here, once this thing gets identified in people's mind as the Aliyev referendum, good luck passing it.
Now, put on your consultant hat. For those who don't know, Eric's life outside of CivilNet has been as a political consultant and involved in a lot of elections, especially in the U.S. And so if you were running the opposition's campaign, how would you defeat Nikol Pashinyan and the Civil Contracts Party?
You go after their weaknesses by attacking their strengths. Their claim to fame is peace, that we want to bring peace. Well, you need to show that they failed. The biggest pitfall, the biggest weakness of this government is what I would refer to as anti-nationalism. It's really beyond not being nationalist. They're anti-nationalist. And that has a very narrow base in this country. Even the people who are their voters want to see a strong Armenia, wants to see a strong Armenia that can tell Azerbaijan to go to hell. Doesn't mean they want war. They want a much stronger, they want us to get out of this Weimar Republic type zeitgeist that we're in. So if any forces come out that are pro-defense but not pro-war, pro-Western integration without necessarily being anti-Russian, clearly against the old regime, pro-democratic, and if these people are veterans who served in the war, they're almost beyond reproach. So if you want to come up with a perfect candidate is someone who's a veteran of the war, works in business, skeptical of Russia, pro-Western, pro-democracy, pro-economic growth, and integration into the West, and strongly nationalistic, without calling for war, because no one's interested in that. This anti-nationalism of this regime, this government, is the easiest thing to turn on its head, because it is so counterintuitive to people's basic understanding of themselves and their history.
Now let's do the flip side. So now you're working for a civil contract. What do you do for them to have them win, especially against a potential candidate like that, which sounds very strong?
First and foremost, the economy. It's like the primary reason that this government still has significant minority support, and it's minority support, but it's significant. If there's an election today, they'll finish first, as things stand right now. Which less votes than they did in the last election, but they'll finish first. Is the economy, is the fact that we've had strong economic growth, that during the last 5 years, per capita income has doubled. People's standard of living are rising. Now, all of that, frankly, has been overshadowed by security issues. But if you're an average person living your average life and your economic prospects are improving, you're going to vote for the ruling government. Now, how much are they responsible for? It's a completely different matter. Any government in power gets credit for a good economy, and every government in power gets blamed for a bad economy, even if their policies did not lead to the good or bad outcomes. So you would build a campaign around economic growth, around higher standards. You would build a campaign, secondly, around basic improvements, infrastructure, things that you see. You go to a lot of villages, brand new schools, better roads, things that people actually care about. What you see and use in the country is actually improving, because there's less corruption, there's more money being invested in these things. There's actually more money in the country to invest in these things. And lastly, and the weakest claim to fame would be that, we've prevented a war for the last 2 years, and let us continue our peace work to see if we can continue. That's the weakest thing that they have. And obviously, they'll try to demonize any opponent as being for pro-war. Now, how much that will work, I'm not sure, depending on who the opponent is. This is where the Artsakhi component comes in, because demonizing Artsakhis is the easiest way to make that case. But I think economy, infrastructure, and then other things. The less people think about security issues, the more they think about their standard of living and things that they see improving, the better it is for the ruling government. So you would actually focus around that, and you would talk less about security issues. Security issues are simply not their strength for obvious reasons. If you've lost 3 wars in 5 years, that's not what you want to talk about.
So while we've talked about the internal factors, there are some that could be coming externally as well. Do you think there would be any foreign interference in this? And if so, who, and what would it look like?
We already have foreign interference in this. It's very clear. We have Azeri interference in our elections. The referendum is an Azeri interference in our elections and nothing else. I expect the Russian political system, intelligence system to be very active in these elections, pushing for candidates that are anti-Western, pro-Russian. How they do it, it's hard to say. They obviously will be, they have great reach in social media and media in this country. They can push those lines. So I'm assuming the Russian state will engage in trying to defeat this current government. And to push for pro-Russian candidates, and you got a little glimpse of it. The mayor of Gyumri last week said he's for the joining Belarus and Russia, even though no one even asked him. It's not really his position. So they're trying to build up on this anti-Western case. So now, do they put their resources behind the old regime types? I don't think so, because those people are all discredited. And they understand that those people have failed. So I suspect there'll be new forces. If people are out there and they're not being critical of Russia, or they're speaking critically of the West, or keeping silent about Russian actions or about the West in general, and you can come up with the smartest Russian play here is not to back someone who's pro-Russian. is to back someone who's skeptical of the West, because the pro-Russian position has no market in Armenia, and that's been dead for a long time. So Azeri interference, we already have it. Russian interference, we're almost certain to have it. Western interference, if it happens, will be in the context of supporting this government. Foreign leaders coming here before the election, things of that nature. So it's not like they won't interfere. They'll just interfere in much more open, transparent ways of trying to, give support to this government, a new EU deal, putting in monies. You're going to be getting this over the next 10 years. So that's, to me, that's also interference. But there's, different kinds of it and for different purposes. But I think those are the three things: Azeri, Russian, and Western, with each going with after. With Azeris is simply to cause chaos. With the Russians is to support their line, and with the EU, I suspect interference in the sense of supporting this government would be to support the Western move or the pivot towards the EU, but in not covert ways, but in quite actually open ways.
So the chessboard is being set, and there's these things that we can predict. But then there's also the X factor, or the black swan type event. What could come up that could really change things dramatically?
Another invasion. Another significant invasion. If something like the Jarmuk invasion of 22 happens, it will be the DX factor, because at that point, this prime minister could fall if the results are not better than what we had. The entire peace agenda would collapse. So it's a good part of the civil contract campaign would collapse. You could technically have a situation in which they have to change the prime minister inside of the party. It's hard to see. We've said this before. this government survived the ethnic cleansing. This government survived and losing multiple wars. But I think given the investment they've made in this peace concept, and that the other side has agreed, and suddenly there's war, it's hard to see this government surviving, actually this prime minister surviving another major investment. The government can survive until an election. But the X factor would be external aggression. The only other thing would be some massive economic dislocations in the world if the world heads into a recession. But then they'll be so universal. You have a 2008 type crisis because of the Trump tariffs and other things, but those are secondary. I think the only serious X factor is another major invasion of Armenia, like in 22, not a border shooting here or there, but I'm talking about a major incursion that leads to hundreds of deaths or people being dislocated. Everything will become new the moment after that. Everything we've known before is gone, and you have a whole new set of rules. Other than that, I don't see any other significant X factors.
Well, it sounds like that would really perhaps interfere with Aliyev's whole plan to get this constitution through too. So, hypothetically, does that mean it's hard to predict, but it might be quiet until the election?
He could care less about the Constitution. The Constitution is just another excuse not to sign something, because he's never going to sign anything. And even if this government, the greatest humiliation with this government is, they'll actually might get this Constitution passed, and then he's still not going to sign. And he's going to come up with 3 other things. So this whole thing is farcical. He doesn't care less about the Constitution. He only cares about it in the extent that he can cause political chaos in Armenia. So it's not about this or that. Aliyev, under no circumstances, will ever sign a peace deal. He has absolutely no reason to. So all of these are simply excuses, and the Constitution is just the most delicious one, because you're forcing this government to take very unpopular positions. And I think I'm convinced of this. What he really wants them to do is to actually cheat. Is to stuff ballots to get this thing passed. Because at that point, the democratic legitimacy of this government is gone, to serve the purposes of some third-rate foreign fascist.
Well, it's another sobering thought to end with, but thank you for being here, Eric, and really trying to let us know what's going to be happening going forward. And it could be a very fraught moment, so we have to prepare for it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining CivilNet.